Hey everyone, it's Joe Waxman, and this morning I want to look at the chart of Jim Jones, cult leader, the guy who came up, well, I guess he didn't come up with it, but the colloquial expression, drinking the Kool-Aid, that came from Jim Jones, just to put it in perspective. Jonestown Massacre, all that. All right. Don't forget to hit like button, guys. It's really important that I get some likes. It just helps me out a lot, helps other people see these videos, helps my channel grow. Share it, subscribe if you haven't already. Trying to get my channel to grow a little more. All right, thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. All right. Jim Jones, cult leader. So Jim Jones, he had a difficult upbringing. He's got his sun in Taurus conjunct Chiron, and his father was, I think, injured in war, and he was very sickly, and so that's we can see that with sun conjunct Chiron, relating to his father, and his father was often absent, and in the hospital a lot, and his mother, Moon in Aries, was not very motherly. That's not only Aries, that's also the North Node. She was just very, very distant, not very present in his life, and he grew up mostly being raised by his neighbors and whatnot, because his father was sick and in the hospital, and his mother was just not motherly. Whenever North Node is conjunct a planet, it comes through later in life, but early in life, that planet is absent as well, right? Or it doesn't play a major role. It is somewhat missing because the North Node is what happens later in life. So I want to share the Wikipedia page because, sorry, just ignore this for a second. I was on Facebook right here. His early life is pretty interesting and it's pertinent. And then I'll go back to the chart. His father was disabled in World War I. Chemical weapons attacks, so that's Chiron conjunct Sun. His mother had no maternal instincts, neglected her son. He was a difficult kid. He would curse a lot and steal a lot, and he had said that, yeah, good morning, you son of a bitch. Hello, you dirty bastard. He would greet his neighbors saying that. Developed an intense interest in religious and social doctrines. Became a voracious reader. Studied Hitler, Stalin, Marx, Mao Zedong, Mahatma Gandhi. Spent hours in the community library. He did not espouse any radical political views in his youth. So commented on his child, Jones stated, I was ready to kill by the end of the third grade. I mean, I was so aggressive and hostile. I was ready to kill. Nobody gave me love, any understanding. In those days, a parent was supposed to go with a child to school functions. There were some school performances, and everybody's parent was there, but mine. I'm standing there alone, always was alone. That's very sad. So yeah, very difficult upbringing, very alone. And just one more thing. While he was attending a baseball game in Richmond, Jones was bothered by the treatment of African Americans who attended the game. The events at that baseball game brought the discrimination against African Americans to Jones' attention and influenced his strong aversion to racism. So I'm going to go back to his chart. The thing about Jim Jones is that we can often sort of shoebox a character and put them, label them solely by their, most famous attributes, which is the Jonestown Massacre. However, he does have some good qualities as well. He was very anti-racist, and well, I'll get to that more, but he led in Indiana like a whole civil rights movement. All right, so he's got his sun conjunct Chiron in the 5th house, and that has a nice trine to Saturn in great dignity in Capricorn, Capricorn ascendant. So Saturn and Capricorn on the ascendant, conjunct or trine his sun, conjunct Chiron in the 5th house. Chiron, incidentally, as you probably know already, is the wounded reject, often known called the wounded healer. Healer in its more developed stages, healer, teacher, sometimes shaman even. In its earlier stages, less developed, less evolved, it's the wounded reject. Rejected by his mother, wounded by a poison arrow. So a lot of pain, rejection, odd, quirky outcast type thing, qualities. But he embraced minorities, particularly Black people in America. And so I think that has something to do with Chiron conjunct Sun, as well as the condition of his father. The ability to embrace the outcasts of society. Not that Black people, at that time they were, though. There was a lot of segregation and racism early on. I mean, we're talking, he was born 1931. So today we would not consider Black people as, outcasts. But when there's still active segregation and racism, overtly in society, then it definitely fits the Chironic archetype. And Saturn also is about the people, right? Saturn has it's about the people as a whole, society. And Capricorn with Saturn in the 1st house in Capricorn, this is somebody who can really command respect, right? Because Saturn is in good dignity, it's in its domicile. Saturn in Capricorn is like, boss material, like somebody who's just, disciplined, structured, has authority, gains the respect of others, is a leader. His Saturn was retrograde, which means that he's going to have, this makes me think of, just off the top of my head, Sean Connery, who had it even more tightly conjunct the ascendant, but Saturn in Capricorn retrograde. So you see already a similarity here. Like Sean Connery is like, like you can always picture him laughing, telling dirty jokes, and just being like this, kind of boss man, like supreme masculine, male chauvinist, but at the same time, like he has your respect, and you just can't help but love Sean Connery. And then Jim Jones, who greets people, hey, you dirty bastard, you old son of a bitch, that sort of thing. Like that's Saturn in Capricorn retrograde. It's going against the grain. He's not afraid to use his authority and his respect and his, kind of boss material to rub people the wrong way, but with, perhaps, hopefully, a sense of humor about it. Maybe not, because he was full of hatred, I guess, to some extent, because of his difficult youth. Anyway, it is trying the sun. So he is already, we can tell, like, this is a boss man. This is a boss material. Somebody who can go in front of the crowd and really gain a lot of respect and authority among people. 5th house as well is a house of entertainment and performance, right? It's being on stage, it's fun, it's games, it's creativity, it's acting, it's it's a very generalized house of education, but also children and performance and creativity. So definitely I didn't even mention that, or I don't know if I mentioned, he became a minister, right? So ministers, he's Christian teaching, right? On the stage. So the fifth house is excellent for that, right? Especially his uh, highly dignified Saturn in the first house, angular. Okay. Then we get to the moon in Aries, with the whole stellium here. If you're including North Node tightly conjunct the moon, then Uranus, then Venus. And that's, well, third quadrant, but the IC is late degrees in Aries, so it's moving into the fourth house. And that's important when we consider that minister of a church, church is a brick and mortar building that qualifies as fourth house. Anything that's brick and mortar can be fourth house. It's not just the home where you live, which is also going to be, physical. Calling brick and mortar, even if it's wood, I mean, obviously it's just something physical, right? So a church also qualifies as fourth house. So does a monastery, so does a restaurant, so does a, compound, right, of a cult leader, which will make sense as we move down, as we go over the whole story. Then if we look at his seventh house, we have an exalted Jupiter in Cancer conjunct Pluto. And this is squaring the fourth house planets, right? Especially Uranus and Venus. But Jupiter in Cancer is supposed to be very wise and full of heart wisdom, right? And I think he was, yeah, because we can see that with his social activism. And let me just pull up the Wikipedia page again, because it's important to realize. Hold on, I messed up. Okay, yeah, here we go. Just how active he was. So he was already a minister and he was gaining popularity. And he was very into civil rights and like integration of Black people. And he wanted to be a preacher that part of a congregation or church that was involved, that had Black people in it, that was not segregated, because some of these churches were segregated. Racial integration. All right, so in 1960, Indianapolis mayor, that's in Indiana, Charles Boswell, appointed Jones director of local human rights commission. You can see by then he was already gaining popularity because he was well respected. He was into the civil rights and integration, and he was very friendly with the Black people, Black community. And for some reason, he gained this political position, which is also fourth house, because homeland, politics is often seen by the fourth house. Jones ignored Boswell's advice to keep a low profile, however, and used the position to secure new outlets for views on local radio and television programs. By the way, he was also a communist and an atheist, closet. He did not want these views to go out, but he was basically an atheist and a communist, and he wanted to infiltrate the church. There's so much to try and unpack. I'm not going to go through the whole Wikipedia. I did read most of it, but yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, you see this exalted Jupiter in his civil rights activity, but at the same time, he was deeply involved with the church, although he wasn't very religious. He was more of a communist. So it's kind of confusing. But he used his position to go on local radio and television programs. The mayor urged him to curtail his public actions, but he refused. Jones was wildly cheered at the NAACP, which is, what does that stand for? National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So it's the Black People's Association, Civil Rights Association. He encouraged his audience to be more militant, capping his speech with, "Let my people go." All right. Jones helped radically integrate churches, restaurants, telephone company, police department, theater, amusement park, university. When swastikas were painted on the homes of two black families, Jones walked through the neighborhood, comforted the local black communities, and counseled white families not to move. Set up sting operations in order to catch restaurants who refused to serve black customers. Wrote to the American Nazi Party leaders and passed their response to the media. Jones was hospitalized and placed in a black ward, and he refused to be moved. They began to make beds and empty bedpans of black patients. Political pressures, which resulted in Jones' action, caused the hospital to desegregate the wards. In Indiana, Jones was criticized for his integrational views. The People's Temple, I guess that was his temple at the time, became target of white supremacists. Swastikas placed on the temple, sticks of dynamite left in the coal pile, dead cat thrown at Jones's house. Nevertheless, Jones's activities attracted a larger congregation. By the end of 1961, Indianapolis was far more racially integrated city, and Jim Jones was almost entirely responsible. Rainbow family. Jones adopted several non-white children. And he referred to his household as Rainbow family, not just black kids. Was part Native American, Korean American. They had one child who they named Stefan Gandhi. He also had an illegitimate child with one of his congregation members. Okay, let's go back. So I just wanted to mention that because, you know, when you hear about Jonestown Massacre, you don't even get any of that he was this very prominent civil rights leader at the time, which is important in understanding who he was and why he was what he was. All right, let's go back to his sun sign. Sun in Taurus is very stubborn. It's a fixed earth. It's the most stubborn sign, and often you see strong leaders with Sun in Taurus because of their ability to just be fixed and grounded and stubborn and leadership oriented. Fixed signs are very well fixed and cardinal usually, but fixed signs, especially for cult leaders, for some reason, Sun in Taurus makes a good cult leader, but fixed signs in general. But yeah, and then this dignified Saturn in the first house, and then Jupiter in Cancer makes him very, you know, for some reason, like he's not religious. Let's look at the ninth house lord, Mercury. Mercury's in Taurus in, well, fourth quadrant, fifth whole sign house. So, and it's trine the ascendant. So that doesn't, if you look by the trine, then you'd have to say that it's more fifth house, because well, it's also part of this grand Earth trine with Neptune in eighth quadrant, ninth whole sign. But the fifth house gains its energy by being trine the ascendant. That's why it's a trinal house. So it does have fifth house energy, even if it's fourth quadrant. So it's fourth and fifth. But his Mercury is stationary, and stationary Mercury can be very, very skilled, either skilled with the hands or skilled in communication and intellect, because now the mind is becoming very, very still, right? We can look at just how slow his Mercury is. 2 degrees and 2 minutes and 36 seconds. So mine is very slow. Mine is 17 minutes. So I know because the way that I think versus the way that other people think. I have direct experience of what it means to have a slow Mercury. He's very, very smart, and his expression, his ability to express is going to be very well developed because of the stationary Mercury. And it's part of this grand trine. It's, conjunct his, trine his ascendant. It's not in great aspect, but it is in the same sign as the sun, so that's good. It's not in Aries, which would be more difficult. But yeah, he was a preacher. He could talk for hours. So there was something very, very well developed about his intellect. It's important to notice. And not only that, ninth house is in Virgo. Ninth house Lord is in Taurus, trine. So Virgo automatically kind of rejects a very religious mindset, because Jupiter is in detriment in Virgo. It's too intellectual, right? And then Neptune also is not in good dignity in Virgo because it's co-ruler of Pisces, so it's also in detriment. It's also retrograde, so he's ninth house issues are becoming more intellectual and imaginative, but in a very obscured way, like idealistic way. Neptune is kind of bringing in the imagination, but like, he was a communist, so we have to factor in that somehow. Like that does have to do with this ninth house being in Virgo. His civil rights activity, we can definitely see with Jupiter in Cancer, meaning that, he was still all embracing. Like it's a mixed bag. He was for the people, Saturn in Capricorn on the ascendant. Right. And then this very charismatic in a very strict authoritarian way. Right, with this grand trine, with Mercury here in Taurus. He started to take drugs, and he also developed this kind of delusional idea about himself being sort of like Christ-like or a prophet, because he had this dynamic hold on his congregation. Now, Pluto here in the seventh house, conjunct Jupiter, is corrupting his Jupiter. So even though he was a very prominent civil rights activist, very powerful preacher, minister, who had a lot of followers, he, especially around the time that he started to take drugs, he started to become very controlling of the people in his ministry, in the people in his church. And that's Pluto in the seventh house. Pluto also, like I said, Pluto and Jupiter are square Uranus and Venus. So the Uranus square plus its conjunct North Node, the Uranus square is it's radicalizing the Jupiter. Pluto is making it very obsessive, very controlling, very psychological and deep. It's a difficult aspect. And so we can see communism, especially with North Node conjunct Uranus. Uranus would be the radicalization. Fourth house would be all about the commune, the community, let's all gather in Jim Jones's church. He wanted to create a community, right? Where his philosophy was all embracing, but at the same time, all powerful and controlling. And as he gained more people, he started to become abusive, which is Pluto. And he was facing pressures because of that, and he started to become delusional as well, delusions of grandeur. And he decided to move his congregation, which was quite popular, down to South America, because he believed that there was going to be a nuclear attack on, I think he was in San Francisco at the time, on America or San Francisco. Um, and he figured that South America was the best place to go, and he wound up in a country called Guyana, and he built a compound. He was already a million. He gathered his church rather was raking in millions of dollars because he was very powerful. He had a powerful presence. He became a powerful preacher. He could speak, and people loved him. He had all this authority, and it was translating very well to his sun sign here, and his Jupiter and Pluto. Pluto, Jupiter is the very, the wisdom and the heart. He was very accepting and loving of minority groups. And the Pluto is just the dynamic. It's almost like a hypnotist, like, you will do whatever I say. You will follow me everywhere. That's Pluto. It's the charm, the psychological domination of other people, right? So he has this very powerful chart here. And seventh lord is in the fourth house. He wants to bring everyone into his church, everyone into his commune, everyone into his community, everyone into his grasp, right? There's a lot of planets right around, including this Mercury is still within the fourth house. It's in the fourth quadrant, but not the fourth whole sign. But you can, there's still this all this energy around the IC, whether this is third house, fourth house, it's third, fourth, fifth house energy, all gathering around the fourth house. So that's bringing plus this grand trine. Mars is trine the moon, north node, Uranus. So that's bonifying this fourth house because Mars is ruling Aries. So this is a very powerful trine here between Mars and Mars's rulership over these planets in Aries. So that makes it even more powerful, this congregation of planets, stellium of planets in Aries and early Taurus. Mars is in the eighth house, so a lot of secrecy and sexuality and occult kind of, deep kind of. Eighth house can be very deep. I don't know if he was directly into the occult, so I don't want to say cult, but like secrecy and hidden things, like psychological type power and control and domination and other people's resources and money. He was very, and Mars is very motivated, very initiative, very and sexual. And so like there were, sexual abuse, mental, emotional abuse. He was out for control and power and authority. And so when the pressure started building, when he started to take the drugs and, became more and more paranoid, then he's like, all right, let's move congregation. And he was a communist. So he's like, he tried to disguise that because it had a big negative connotation, obviously. But he's like, let's move our congregation to Jonestown, Guyana. They called it Jonestown, but a compound in Guyana that he had with he bought with the millions of dollars that he raked in through his ministry. So they all moved. He convinced, like, I think initially 500 or 600 people, then like another 400 people came in the following months. And they all moved down to Jonestown, Guyana's compound. And it became increasingly cultish because people couldn't leave. He had his own mini army. He had a bunch of guns and he trained his soldiers, and he became more and more paranoid and crazy from the drugs. And he convinced his followers that they needed to protect themselves, and he had all these drills. All his soldiers who had guns and bows and arrows would like go on these drills, and the people started to become freaked out because they couldn't leave, because he had this army and they were scared because, like, once you have an army, then if you turn against Jim Jones, or like, they're afraid that they were going to get killed, right? And he wouldn't let anyone leave. and they were basically slaves, because they had to work a lot. They hardly had any food. They were in the middle of the jungle in South America, right? And they had this compound, and Jim Jones had a lot of money, but offshore, and they had very few resources, and they just had to work all the time. And at night, they would listen to Jim Jones preach for hours, and they had a PA system where recordings of Jim Jones would just be blaring all day long while they were slave laboring in the jungle, for a very, very difficult, survival. And so there started to become visitors because they're family members of the people who were there, and like there's nearly 1,000 people in this compound. Were getting worried, and then like officials started visiting IRS and whatnot, and that fueled Jim Jones's paranoia. And then there was this event. This happened over several years, where a congressman came to visit Jim Jones with cameramen and the media, and everything was fine until they left and they started to board the plane, and Jim Jones ordered his soldiers, his army, his mini army, to not let them leave, and a shootout ensued, and they killed the congressman and the media, some of the media, and some of them fled. Some people escaped along with some of the inhabitants. And that was the beginning of the end, because once you kill a congressman, like, you can't get away with that. Some people fled and returned to, they had the story, they were witnesses. They were like, oh my God, this madman in the jungle is keeping all these people, as slaves, and he's killed the congressman, and we have to go break them up. And so that's when Jim Jones was like, there's no turning back, guys. We have to commit mass suicide. And he's a full-blown communist by then. He's like, praising Russia and Cuba and China. And he's like, this is some glorious sacrificial suicide. I forget the exact term. It really doesn't matter. Some communistic term. And he's like, and he had already bought the cyanide, because he probably had planned on doing this for a while. Just, hadn't come to that point yet. And yeah, he's like, we all have to drink the Kool-Aid. It wasn't Kool-Aid, it was Flavor Aid. But he made a big batch of poisonous Flavor Aid, which is, I don't know what flavor, it's like Kool-Aid, I guess. And everyone drank it, and most people didn't want to drink it. They felt terrorized by Jim Jones and his army. And those who didn't drink it were forcibly injected with cyanide. Where have we seen that before? Forcible injection sounds familiar. Anyway, yeah, they were forcibly injected with cyanide, and the rest drank the Kool-Aid, and like over 900 people were forcibly killed, because Jim Jones now had no choice, because he had ordered the murder of a congressman and several media people, or at least one media people. And basically he was a dictator, a tyrant dictator, under the guise of communism, which was under the guise of some version of Christianity, and very strange indeed how it all went down. Yeah, and then there was a bunch of their children died, like 200 children, 600, 700 adults, and then there were a bunch of people who survived and lived to tell the tale, like the basketball team who wasn't there. Some people slept through it, oddly enough. Some people were away or managed to escape. Yeah, but that's the whole story behind drinking the Kool-Aid, or the condensed version. And Jim Jones, who was a very authoritarian, respected, charismatic church leader, who was also a civil rights leader, who turned into a cult leader, right? So this is also a good lesson on how dignified planets can go bad, right? Sometimes you have undignified planets who somebody makes the best out of them, and sometimes people have quite dignified planets and they turn out quite. I mean, this Jupiter is questionable with, square to Uranus and conjunct Pluto. Even if it is in Cancer, it's still pretty rough, um, roughly treated by this Pluto. Pluto is really a difficult planet to make work. Um, Not that it can't, it's just not easy. And neither is Uranus. But yeah, we can see all that here. I mean, North Node conjunct Moon is a very obsessive placement as well, because now the emotions are being brought in, and North Node and the Moon becomes very obsessive, because the Moon can be quite a needy planet. When it's North Node conjunct the Moon, then they become very emotionally needy. Here it's in the fourth house or fourth house, in Aries. So his leadership, his initiation, his Mars is being activated in the eighth house. So eighth house is very hidden, secretive, but the drugs we can see that because of the emotionality that the Moon, drugs are often associated with the Moon. So like when the Moon is afflicted, drug addiction can become prominent, as well as any mental health issues, with an afflicted Moon. And North Node can definitely afflict the Moon. It's North Node conjunct Uranus too. Didn't even really talk much about Venus. Venus is in detriment here in Aries. It's ruling the fifth house, his sun, dispositing his sun, and the MC. So you can see like career, his public image and career is going into the fourth house of home, commune, you could say, church, family, group. Yeah. Disposited by Mars in the eighth house, so secret dealings, hidden things. Mars is ruling the 11th house, also of community, groups, networks. So it's all quite shady, and although in a very different way, there is some similarities to Ted Bundy, who had a very strong, his fourth house was in Scorpio, but still a lot of fourth house things, and he, very gross stuff, but he brought people home too. I mean, just to make it light of it. This Venus is square Saturn, so that's quite difficult also for his relationships, and his joy. Not a very happy guy. I mean, if Venus and Moon are both afflicted, that it shows a lot of dishappiness, dishappiness. I think that's a new word. Dishappiness. Are you just happy? So his Venus actually has a square to Pluto and Saturn is kind of opposite this Pluto. I mean, it's very intense, right? His treatment of women will be very questionable, abusive towards women, sexual relationships with Mars in the eighth. I mean, not necessarily Mars in the eighth, but with everything else, with this dispositing this fourth house, it just feels pretty kind of icky because of the Moon and the Venus and the Uranus. It's just kind of radical. Too much power, and then the radicalization of his Moon and Venus. It's conjunct the Uranus. I don't know, everything. It's just too much. Too much going on. Yeah. And you can also, what's interesting is that you can look by the nodes to see how a person's life will go. The South Node is alone, right? It's alone here in the 9th, 10th house. So public he's growing up very publicly. So he was raised by neighbors. Libra is very social. If your south node is alone, your early half of life can be pretty alone as well. If your north node is alone, your second half of life can be pretty alone. Both of them are alone, you might be pretty alone. But we can see here, he grew up relatively alone, and then as he moved into the second half of his life, he was surrounded by people in a home like setting, communal setting, right? So you can look at it like that. If we look at his draconic chart, really interesting because it's not very different. Saturn is even more conjunct the ascendant, still in Capricorn. Moon goes into Pisces, so more creative, perhaps even delusional, less conducive to drugs and alcohol because of the delusional nature of Pisces. So probably good as long as he can stay away from drugs and alcohol, good for creativity. Let's see, Uranus, still in Aries, Uranus, Venus, Mercury, all in Aries. Mercury, stationary Mercury is above his Venus, so and Uranus, so his speaking and expression are becoming more Uranian, so radicalized, but also potentially brilliant. And Venus will add a lot of, make him a better communicator, better speaker. That's very music. It's great for music and the arts. Although it's not a dignified Venus, still, I think his speaking ability would benefit from that conjunction. Mercury, Chiron, again with the connection to minorities and whatnot. Pluto and Jupiter, still in Cancer, but even more conjunct the descendant. Mars is still in Leo. A little more the seventh house here. I mean, not that, it's very, very similar. I mean, there's not that much difference. The MC is even more conjunct with his south node. So that would mean IC is even more conjunct with his north node. So it's just re-emphasizing basically everything. So he's like, doubled over, like, everything that he appears to be, he really is, even more so on the inside, which is interesting. And the third one, I just thought I'd pull up the exact date of the mass suicide. And this is the second biggest mass suicide in American history, next to the jab. Bing, bing. Okay. Not funny, but it's kind of true. Anyway, what's interesting is that Sun and Uranus and Venus are all in Scorpio on the date that there was the mass suicide. So that's kind of my big takeaway. Pluto's in Libra, so social Libra. Yeah, what else? I mean, I don't know if anything else really correlates that much. North Node in Virgo. Yeah. Saturn in Virgo. A lot of stuff in Sag. I think the Scorpio relating to the death theme is most significant. Sun, Uranus, and Venus in Scorpio. So anyway, that's Jim Jones. Guys, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, share it if you like it, and book a reading with me. Go to my website, macroastrology.com, or email me at macrogoalmachine@yahoo.com, and leave a comment if you like. And that's it for now. That's the Kool-Aid guy, Jim Jones, Jonestown Massacre. So very educational, very interesting, and yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. All right, thanks, bye.